Lawrence Rockefeller, a brother in the family of David and Nelson Rockefeller, invited a dozen of us investigating UFOs to his JY Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on September 14 to 15, 1993. He called it a UFO roundtable. By then, Bill Clinton had been U.S. president for 9 months. The group of us had been invited to talk candidly with Mr. Rockefeller about our various research efforts ranging from animal mutilations, human abductions, crop formations, telepathy, ESP, to government and military policies of lies and denial about the alien presence interacting with Earth. What we did not know was that Lawrence Rockefeller, with the help of retired Naval Intelligence Officer C.B. Scott Jones, had prepared an ad to be placed in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and a few other major newspapers that read, quote, "Mr. President," meaning Bill Clinton, "on the subject of UFO phenomena, what do you know? When did you learn it? Have you shared it with Congress? When will you talk to the American people about it? The subject is as important as any we will ever face. Don't try to go it alone. This information belongs to the world," close quote. This was Lawrence Rockefeller's velvet glove threat behind the pressures he was putting on newly elected President Bill Clinton to open up the government's UFO files to the public. Mr. Rockefeller knew that then Chief of Staff John Podesta was a big supporter of disclosing the truth of UFOs, and he knew that Bill and Hillary Clinton wanted to know more as well. 2 years went by after that gathering of us researchers without Lawrence Rockefeller's ad appearing nationwide in major newspapers. Perhaps because President Clinton seemed to be trying in his own way to go around the classified blocks of intelligence agencies. On April 17, 1995, Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12958. That would require his intelligence agencies to allow for the declassification of all documents 25 years or older back to 1970, and that would be provided they did not compromise nuclear secrets or other security concerns. That 1995 August, it appears that Hillary Clinton sat down alone with Lawrence Rockefeller to talk about UFO ET disclosure when the Clintons vacationed at the Rockefeller Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Apparently, President Clinton did not participate because his science advisor, John Gibbons, wrote in a memo that Lawrence Rockefeller, quote, "will want to talk with you about his interest in extrasensory perception, paranormal phenomena, and UFOs. Soon after you were inaugurated, Les Aspin and Mel Laird referred Lawrence to me concerning the famous Roswell incident dating from 1947, in which UFO buffs claimed a flying saucer crashed near the town of Roswell, New Mexico, and that the U.S. Air Force had classified the entire event, beginning a conspiracy theory that remains today. Rockefeller sought from me the administration's help in declassifying the information and making the whole matter public and open. He knows that we are trying to be helpful in responding to his concerns about UFOs and human potential, and that we're keeping an open mind about such matters. But I've made no secret about my conviction that we must not be too diverted from more earthly imperatives, close quote. That was John Gibbons, science advisor, addressing the memo to President Bill Clinton about Lawrence Rockefeller's inquiry, wanting Bill Clinton as the new president to open up UFOs. Well, during that August 1995 vacation of the Clintons with Lawrence Rockefeller at the Wyoming Ranch, Hillary was photographed carrying a newly published book entitled, "Are We Alone? Philosophical Implications of the Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life by theoretical physicist and astrobiologist Paul Davies. Canadian researcher and author Grant Cameron, who produces the excellent history website presidentialufo.com, was able to retrieve documents through the Freedom of Information Act that showed Rockefeller was soliciting help from Hillary's staff on drafting a document to President Bill Clinton in 1995. And the title of that Rockefeller document was, quote, "Lifting Secrecy on Information about Extraterrestrial Intelligence as Part of the Current Classification Review," close quote. Whatever happened in conversation between Rockefeller and Hillary Clinton, the Clinton administration did not break open revelations about UFOs and ETs. But last year, in 2015, Hillary's and Bill's good friend and advisor, John Podesta, had been working as a counselor to President Barack Obama when Hillary decided she was going to run for president. On February 13th, 2015, Podesta resigned from the Obama administration to begin working for Hillary and tweeted at 8:55 a.m. that morning when he left the White House, quote, "John Podesta at Podesta 44, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again not securing the disclosure of the UFO files. Hashtag the truth is still out there." And he copied his tweet to New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd. Then 8 months later, on September 29th, 2015, Podesta tweeted again about UFOs. This time he was congratulating TV actress Lena Dunham about her interview with Hillary Clinton for Dunham's email newsletter called Lenny. Podesta tweeted, quote, "Great interview at Lena Dunham, but Lena, ask her about aliens next time," and put 2 exclamation marks, close quote. 3 months after that, during campaigning in Conway, New Hampshire, Hillary was talking with reporter Damon Steer at the Conway Daily Sun. He had asked Hillary about UFOs in her 2007 presidential campaign, and now asked her again in his December 2015 interview. He reported Hillary said with enthusiasm, quote, "Yes, I am going to get to the bottom of it," close quote. Back in 2007, Hillary told the same New Hampshire reporter that the, quote, "#1 topic of Freedom of Information requests that her husband, former President Bill Clinton, received at his presidential library was UFOs," close quote. In 2014, Bill Clinton told late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel that he would not be surprised if Earth has been visited by aliens since so many planets out there may support life. In his recent December 2015 interview with Hillary, that same New Hampshire reporter Steer asked Hillary about Bill Clinton's comment to Kimmel. She said, quote, "I think we may have been visited already. We don't know for sure," close quote. Then she added that her 2016 campaign manager, John Podesta, quote, "has made me personally pledge we are going to get the information out one way or another. Maybe we could have like a task force to go to Area 51 in Nevada," close quote. Keeping track of the Lawrence Rockefeller, Clinton, and John Podesta interests in breaking open truths about UFOs is Grant Cameron from Winnipeg, Canada. He produces and reports the excellent website presidentialufo.com. And after this short break, Grant joins us to dig deeper into the political and intelligence matrix that keeps UFOs and ETs tightly bottled up. Grant, one of the areas that I hope that we could start with is, what is your perspective from all the research that you have done going back into presidential archives about what might actually have happened with UFOs at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge on that December 26th to 28th, 1980?
Well, I discovered this by accident. Basically, I was aware of the Rendlesham Forest story, but I was lecturing in Eureka Springs, Arkansas about 10 years ago, and I had gone back to where it all began for me in 1975, where for a whole year there was a series of sightings of an object known as Charlie Red Star. And I had gone back to the town to film different spots where I had some very close encounters with these things. I actually had an incident that was almost like the Bentwaters incident. And so I'm taking pictures of different things for my lecture. And I talked to a guy by the name of Bob Diemert, who was the guy who ran the airport in this small town of 2,000 people, about 25 miles north of the U.S.-Canada border above North Dakota. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, Bob, I'm doing this lecture, and I just wanted to know from you, what do you think actually was going on? Why do you think the UFOs were here? And he said, well, you know why they were here. And I said, no, Bob, I don't. And he said, yes, you do. I told you back then why they were here. And I said, Bob, in 30 years, I have no idea why these things were here. I never thought about it. I just wanted to ask you. And he said, I told you, we stood up in the hills and we watched these things. They came from the United States. It's the nuclear weapons. And as soon as he said that, all the bells and whistles and fireworks went off my head, and I instantly knew he was right, because I live just north of the Minuteman III missile silos, and these are two big establishments. One is the Minot Air Force Base, one is the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where the missiles have all been taken out now. But at 1975, when I first had my experiences, there was 300 nuclear missile silos in North Dakota. They had said that if North Dakota had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. There was that many nuclear weapons. These big Minuteman III missiles with, the 10 warheads and all this kind of stuff. And we'd all seen them. And we knew that if there was ever a nuclear exchange, our city, Winnipeg, was the first to go, because every 10th Russian missile would land short and right on top of us. So we knew these missiles were there. We had seen them. And when he mentioned this, and he said, I told you that I had a meeting with an Air Force guy at Minot Air Force Base in a bar on the border, and I told you this story where they had tried to ram this one over top of a nuclear missile silo. And I said, yeah, okay, now I remember you telling me these stories. And so I started looking at why this had happened to me. And what I had determined was that when I had my sighting, my first sighting was in May of 1975, which was about 2 weeks after the end of the Vietnam War. And the idea that had popped into my head was that the Americans had lost Laos, and they had lost Cambodia, and they lost South Vietnam. And back then, I was actually, my major in the university was political studies, and I wanted to be a criminologist, to study the Soviet government and how the Kremlin worked and all the behind-the-scenes actions and stuff like that. So I was aware of the politics, and I knew that at that time, the major theory in the world was the domino theory, that the communists would just eventually, like dominoes, take one country after another, and eventually they would rule the world. Now, when the Americans had pulled out of South Vietnam, they had taken all the troops with them. And my impression was that the nuclear weapons had something to do with it, because having no boots on the ground in Southeast Asia, if they were sitting there after the Vietnam War in May of 1975 when these sightings started in Carmen, and trying to figure out what are the Russians and Chinese going to do next. Are they going to try to take Philippines or Indonesia, South Korea, and that they might have to use the nuclear weapons in order to stop them because they had no troops there. And so my impression was at that point was that the missiles in North Dakota had been on alert, that somehow the aliens had been able to read the minds of people who were in Washington who were operating these things, and that these missiles had gone on alert, and the people didn't know, but the aliens had known, and that's why we had all these sightings. Because when I talked to Bob Diemert in 10 years ago, I said to him, Bob, how many sightings did you have in 1975? And he said, about 150. And I said, how many did you have after 1975? And he said, well, he started telling me about this sighting, and he mentioned a freeway. And I said, well, Bob, there's no freeways here. Where did you have the sighting? He said, in Phoenix. I said, in 1975, you had the sightings in Carmen, 150 sightings. After 1975, how many sightings did you have in Carmen? He said, none. It was as if the CIA took drugs out of the water. This went on for an entire year. And then in 1976, they went away and they have never come back. There really has not been a sighting in this town since 1976. What I learned later was that in February of 1975, at a town called Nakoma, North Dakota, the U.S. military had put in it was the only operational anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States. This is pre-Star Wars. When Reagan comes in 1988, he starts the Star Wars, putting these weapons in outer space to try to shoot down the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles coming out of the silos. But prior to that, they had built this place at Nakoma, North Dakota. They had a place called Nixon's Pyramid, which is still there. It's a huge, giant pyramid, which was a big radar establishment where they would try to pick up the Russian missiles coming over the pole into Canada. And, of course, the missile silos were the number one target, not the American cities, because unless you take out the missile silos, you're gone. You got to take out the missile silos before you take out the city. So we were always the number one target in North Dakota. So when I saw this, that they had put these in, they had started putting the nuclear weapons in, and what they had put in was another 100 over top of the 300 they had. They had put in another 100 nuclear missiles, and some of them were 5 megaton missiles, which would try to take out the Russian intercontinental missiles in outer space. If they would miss then they had these 1 megaton sprint missiles that would be shot up, and they had this huge field of these missiles where they would try to stop the Russians from taking out these missile silos in North Dakota. So what happened is later, and this is only a couple of years ago, I learned this, that in November of 1975, they had negotiated with the Russians to take out the anti-ballistic missile unit, and they started taking the missiles out in November of 1975, and that's when the sightings stopped. So from February till November of 1975, that's when they were putting in these new missiles. That's when all the UFOs showed up. That's when we saw the UFOs. And after they took the missiles out, the UFOs went away and didn't come back. So I knew there was this very definite connection between what was going on the north side of the U.S.-Canadian border and what was going on in terms of nuclear weapons. So when I was looking at the Rendlesham Forest story, because I was interested in criminology and how the Russian government worked and how the Kremlin worked, I was aware of the story that in December of 1980, when Rendlesham Forest occurred, that in Poland, Lech Walesa and the Solidarity Unit had taken over the country, and that they had made a threat that they were going to pull away from Russia. And this was one of the many satellite countries around Russia, and Russia had made a stand that they would not allow Poland to leave. It would be the first country to leave, that if Poland were to leave, then you would have Hungary and Yugoslavia, and all these other countries would decide that they're going to leave as well. So the Russians had put a number of regiments of troops on the Polish border, and there was this standoff in December of 1980 when Rendlesham Forest happened, and they were threatening to go in. Now, we don't have all the records. You would actually need to look at the State Department records and the records of the American ambassador to Poland to find out exactly what was going on behind the scenes. But it occurred to me the same sort of thing as this very unstable situation in North Dakota in 1975, where the Americans have lost the war and they're trying to figure out what the Russians are going to do next. What I immediately assumed is that was why the Rendlesham Forest incident had occurred, because they had the forward-based nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. And it was not made public. It was not known till later that they actually had these missiles there. It was illegal to have nuclear weapons on the UK soil, and that for some reason somebody in the government had decided that we might have to do something to stop the Soviet Union from reinvading Poland. And there would be this standoff that you and I wouldn't know about, but behind the scenes there would be cables going back and forth between the Russians and the Americans with these threats about don't dare go into the country, and that all these forward-based nuclear weapons would be on alert, that somebody would be thinking about this, and that the aliens would know what's going on. And that's why I interpreted that they may have shown up at Rendlesham Forest, and you got these incidents where they were shooting these beams of light down into the weapon storage areas, that they may have actually been disarming these missiles that would be used in this standoff on the Polish-Russian border. One of the confusions is that people who were in the WSA in that period of time, like Rick Bobo apparently was there on what was midnight, December 27th, going into the early morning of the 28th, when Halt was out there with the tape recorder and all of those people.
he insists on the record that even though he was seeing a moon size, he said it was looked to his eyes like a full moon that was vivid red and blue light in the sky, and he tried to report it to Central Security Control, and they kept telling him that everything was being handled because they had investigators in the forest. He saw lights leave that red-blue large aerial unidentified object, but he insisted that he never saw beams going down into the WSA at that time. However, one of the confusions and contradictions has been that Colonel Halt said that he thought that he saw beams going down into the WSA. So there have been these odd contradictions, and Rick Bobo would have been the closest in the tower overlooking the site. But it doesn't mean that what you're describing did not happen, because we've got 72 hours of phenomena. And on the first night, Jim Penniston and John Burroughs and Ed Kovansak really don't know what was happening at the WSA.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You may have people who were there who are under security, because this was not made public till years later, that may have seen something, but because it was classified that the nuclear weapons were there, people would not really be wanting to talk about this aspect of the story. And you and I had discussed before, it was not just the nuclear weapon, the reports of stuff going on in the nuclear weapon area. It was also the fact that it was not treated like a normal UFO sighting. It wasn't just like some sighting at some Air Force base. You had Air Force intelligence and possibly NSA and all sorts of people suddenly descend on this base as if they know what's going on, that this is not just an ordinary UFO sighting. So it's a lot of this is speculation. You'd almost have to go through the records and get the behind-the-scenes stuff, which we maybe will never get. But it's one of a number of incidents, and the Reynolds from Forest one seemed sort of clear, but as I've pointed out in a paper that I wrote that I was going to put in a manuscript, there is a lot of these incidents. I mean, whether you have the Malmstrom case or particularly the one with Eisenhower in 1954, you have a lot of incidents. When you start looking back at these incidents, you see this bizarre nuclear weapons connection to a lot of major UFO sightings that have occurred through the last 70 years.
And we talked a little about the fact that Colonel Halt had said eye to eye to John Burroughs and me at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., around 2009 to 2010, that he knew for a fact that the National Security Agency took over the investigation of R.A.F. Bentwaters Woodbridge within 24 hours. Do you think that would reinforce your hypothesis that that would happen if, in fact, there was interaction between the lights and the beams in some way with all of the nuclear weapon, tactical weapons that were on both the Woodbridge and the Bentwaters side? Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that seems to fit in. And I think you had also mentioned that he had asked NSA and they said, we have a file and you don't have the need to know,
right?
Which indicates that they knew that this was not an ordinary sighting. It was being held at the highest level. And that would be the sort of the idea that a lot of the stuff that's happened is classified, and we will never know how many various nuclear weapons incidents occurred. But on the highest level, when the aliens do this kind of stuff, when they shut down Malmstrom or when they do this kind of stuff, the people at the highest level know what's going on. You and I won't catch it for 30 years or maybe never catch it, but they are aware of these signals and what's exactly going on, because only they know what was actually going on with the nuclear weapons, whether they were going to move these things to the Polish border or whether there was discussions about it. That's the kind of stuff that you and I will probably never know what was actually going on in that Polish situation.
But how would you relate what we've just all talked about to Jim Penniston's getting the telepathic download in both binary and telepathic thought that the black glassy craft that emerged out of the blast of white light when he and John were deep in the forest near Capel Green, and he had the impression that these were time travelers, he thinks from 40,000 years in the future, who were facing some kind of big threat or extinction and were coming back to harvest genetic material from Earth in the 20th century, and that was why this craft was there.
Well, my impression of that is, and I say I had an incident very similar to that in 1976 where I was. A lot of this, to me, looks like I always see aliens as messaging stuff. And when I got into the consciousness thing, I came to the conclusion that there was, if you look at quantum physics and the UFO stuff, there really is no time and there is no space. There is no physical universe as we sort of have described it in the Newtonian way. And we know that everything is conscious and everything's alive. So what this message is an indirect message to say you don't understand time and space. It's to put this out that you've messed up time and space, and whatever it means, 40,000 years or whatever, that's the part of the thing that we tell the story. And it's a very dramatic type story where they want this, multiple nights. They want to be seen. They turn on the lights. I mean, if an alien craft wants to cloak itself, it can cloak itself. It didn't cloak itself at Rendlesham. They were flying around. They were letting everybody see it. And they were playing like this dramatic sort of event where they wanted it publicized. They wanted this story to be told. They wanted it to be like a major, almost like a major movie presentation that they would get out. And they've done this in other incidents, like, for example, the Chris Bledsoe story, if you know that one. It's dramatic. It's like one event after another where they're doing things that really don't make any sense in terms of what are they actually doing. It's just they're making these displays that they want people to tell the story. And to me, that's this raising of consciousness. So they're talking about the time and space element. They're allowing someone to walk up to it, as they did to me in 1976. I actually walked up to a craft in 1976. So I'm familiar with this type of thing, that they are, in my impression, allowing certain things to happen, allowing people to see certain things because they want you to tell the story. They want you to go out and tell the story, and it has to be dramatic so that people will listen to the story. And so that to me is part of that aspect, that they're giving this message about time and space, and that we've got it all messed up.
John, did you ever hear even a rumor or anything in the last 36 years from anyone hinting that there might have literally been a light or a beam going down into the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge WSA?
Well, I think you can follow Robert Hastings' work, and a major came forward and said that they brought in aircraft from Kirkland, and that there was stuff removed and taken back. So there's an example of, somebody saying that. Colonel Halt then went further and said that he contacted this major, talked to him, and believed what he was telling him was true. Colonel Halt then went further and said that somehow whatever it was in the WSA the ordinance was affected. Some of this came out when they did that nuclear weapons stuff in D.C. a few years ago. And from what I understood, after they did that event, and I've got no proof that this took place, but certain people that spoke certain things about what they said there in D.C., they were kind of given a shot across the bow that they may be going too far. As far as over the 3-night period, there was some radio traffic that went on at certain times when, especially on the third night with Colonel Halt, when I was out there with them also, that these objects in the sky were flying in that general direction of Bentwaters, and there were beams of light that I even saw flash down. That then there was some radio traffic that went on afterwards with the weapon storage area. So, I mean, if you're asking me, can I confirm that something came down inside the weapon storage area? No. Has there been people said possibly there was? Yes. Has there been some people that won't give their names out that claim that something was removed afterwards? Yes. The thing is that I think people focus too hard on sometimes that, well, does that mean that there had to have been a direct beam of anything coming down right on the object, or could it just be something that was in the area that was able to affect it without even having to send a beam down? That could be possible, considering the possibility of the technology, whatever we were dealing with at the time.
And John, doesn't that reinforce one of the rumors that some or all of the tactical nuclear weapons in some area of the weapons storage area was either melted or embedded in something that made them unusable?
Well, first of all, I can't really go into that totally, but what I can tell you is people need to look up what tactical nukes are. And there's been all kinds of things postulating that there are missiles, there were this and that. And that's not what tactical nukes are, okay? Number one. Number two, if you look at how tactical nukes would be deployed in the battlefield, they weren't a major issue, period, that would have anything to do with like the ICBMs and all this other stuff. They would be tactically used to stop something like, say, an advancement into an area. And then, again, those would be the small boys in a big boys war if they were ever deployed. And they would be deployed from aircraft like F-16s or FB-111s. And I can tell you this, without going into what was there for sure, that we were not on alert status whatsoever prior, during, or after the incident that would lead anything to believe that there was a possibility of escalation within NATO. And what I mean by that is just simply our aircraft that were there were A-10s. We had FOLs, and some was always deployed forward into Germany, but the majority of the aircraft were still on station at Bentwaters, Woodbridge, and never did leave. So therefore, the speculation that things were getting hot in Poland, I can't deny that, but there was no spin-up or anything that we were doing directly at our base that would have led you to believe that there was a major escalation going on during that time frame.
And John, isn't one of your puzzles and so many others that a broken arrow, broken hand, some sort of alert wasn't officially declared on the base December 26th when you and Jim and Ed were out in the forest and they lost communication with you for those 45 minutes. And then on the 28th, Rick Bobo was reporting to Central Security Control that there was this huge unidentified aerial object, at least close to the WSA. All of that put together, you would have thought that this would have been a base emergency under the category of threat to some kind of nuclear weapons.
Well, okay, here's the deal. I can talk about helping hands and cover wagons. Okay, I can go into that with no problems. The initial report would have been a helping hand, unless there was direct, like it could immediately go to cover wagon too, but more than likely 99% of the time, whatever happens like that would go to covered or a helping hand. Now, helping hands are mostly designed for direct threat to resources on Air Force installations. So a threat outside the wire necessarily wouldn't be, if it even is considered a threat, immediately up channel to a helping hand. You have to weigh on the fact that the person who was in the tower said nothing ever happened directly inside. So therefore, there would be not necessarily a reason to declare a helping hand or any of the resources within the restricted areas where the aircraft were located. So there is a possibility that a helping hand never was declared. But then there's also some people that claim that there was a helping hand even called on the night that we first went out there that were working inside CSC. But helping hands and cover wagons don't directly relate to what you're implying, Linda. They just mean there's a threat to the installation or the resources involved in installation. It doesn't have to be, any higher than that. And a helping hand is initially declared to evaluate the situation where then it can be extended, but all that is up channeled immediately to higher headquarters in Germany. Well, Mildenhall first, then we went forward to Germany, Ramstein.
But there was some puzzlement among those of you who were involved. I've interviewed with others, and they've said the same thing. They wondered why there was not some sort of base alert called.
Well, you have to base it on the first night. It was Christmas night into the early morning of the Boxing Day. One of our questions, why didn't they come out looking for us? Okay, that was the question. There's a possibility they did. But again, it was outside the wire on the first night, almost 100% for sure. I don't know exactly what went on, over on the other side of the base, partly because they lost radio contact with us for 45 minutes. But what I'm trying to say is, yes, there was some concern on our part. Why didn't somebody come out looking for us? On the third night, that's a whole different animal based on the fact that both flights overlapped. So we actually had 2 flights on duty at the time dealing with this. The majority of what went off base. So we're now into foreign policy, as far as going, how far could we push it? What could we do? Should we keep it low profile? And the final factor is we're not really sure what the command post did and what General Williams did. He clearly was in the loop and he knew a lot of what was going on. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes that, it would be interesting to know what really took place.
And Grant, do you have any insight from your work in the archives and doing presidentialufo.com about why they might not have declared something on base?
Well, not directly, because I didn't do that kind of research. I just sort of looked at all these incidents over the last 70 years where nuclear weapons may have been involved. And so when I look at any of them, whether it's the 52 incident or 54 incident, it's the people in the actual area may not actually know what's going on. It may be something that's taking place in Washington at a very high level, someplace away. And it always comes down to this idea that I always say that aliens are totally telepathic, that they can understand what's going on, not just at the base, but everywhere else. And that if somebody at a high level makes a decision to do something, that could be dragged into it. So, like whether it's Malmstrom or, I don't think they really knew what was going on at the base, but somebody at a higher level in another place may have known what this is all about.
What I'd like to do is have you, Grant, take us through what you've been weaving so well for the last several years about what was happening at the Lawrence Rockefeller level, his trying so hard to break open U.S. government files, and that he was going to try to work through President Bill Clinton and Hillary because he knew that they had interest. But what happened that blocked it? Grant, because it is such a powerful insight to realize that Lawrence Rockefeller, representing that family, in 1993 had prepared that ad to go into major U.S. newspapers that basically saying to the President of the United States from Lawrence Rockefeller, I know that the government knows about an alien presence, about UFOs. When are you going to tell the American public? It is an extremely strong series of words. But the very fact that that was hanging in the wings and that Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and John Podesta knew all of that, why do you think that Lawrence Rockefeller was not able to leverage this open beginning back in 1993?
I think he was going through protocols. I think he was, as I had mentioned before, this is Bud Hopkins telling me the story, that he had decided, he had seen a documentary apparently on Roswell. He was fascinated with Roswell. And he was determined that whoever won the election, whether it was Perot, whether it was Bush, or President Clinton, it didn't really have to be President Clinton, whoever won the election, he told Bud Hopkins and John Mack, I'm going to the president and I'm going to get disclosure. And Bud said to him, Mr. Rockefeller, I don't think that's how it works. And he said, no, I'm going in there and I'm going to do it. I'm going to go talk to the president. So when he went in there, he goes first to Aspen, who I believe worked for him at one point. And Aspen sends him to the science advisor, Dr. John Gibbons. So you go through this sort of protocol. And I think Rockefeller went along with the protocol that you can't just walk into the president's office. You have to go through lower levels as well. And that's what I think the letter was about. He had two things that he was holding over the White House. One was the full-page ad that you read, that every time he wouldn't get his way on what he wanted, he would say to them, okay, I'm going to run this ad. And they would say, hang on, Mr. Rockefeller, we'll do what you want. And they would try to sort of accommodate him. The other thing that he was holding over their head was this letter on disclosure of the ET presence. And he had this letter, and this is the letter that Hillary Clinton helped him edit. He had John Gibbons look at it, and everybody was giving him sort of input on this letter as to what it should say and all this sort of stuff. And it was a letter that he was going to send to the president. And then he would not get his way, And then he would say, okay, I think it's time to send a letter to the president. And then they say, no, hang on, Mr. Rockefeller, don't send a letter. What do you need? And so he was using these two elements to force the issue. But in the end, as I've explained numerous times, he was cut off at the pass, and so was the president. I believe that Clinton knew the inside. He had the top secret material. But he was trying publicly to get the public material for the American people, and that's what Rockefeller was pushing for. So what had happened was they had said to him at one point during the initial part after they'd done the briefing to the science advisor, they had said to him, Mr. Rockefeller, if the UFO disclosure is as deep as you say it is and as wide as you say it is, there's no way we're going to be able to get all this stuff declassified. And they said to Mr. Rockefeller, give us one thing that we can do, give us one case to investigate. We'll investigate that case, we'll get it declassified, and then we'll go after the rest of it. So they were actually playing ball with Lawrence Rockefeller, and they were willing to do what he was demanding. And it was at that point Lawrence Rockefeller said to them, okay, I want you to reinvestigate Roswell. And that's why I keep pointing out to people that in 1993, the U.S. Air Force went out and reinvestigated Roswell. They had shut down the UFO program in 1969, the Blue Book program. They were out of it. They didn't have to get back into it. It was a total PR nightmare. The last thing the U.S. Air Force wanted to do was go back and reinvestigate Roswell. The reason they did it was because it was green-lighted, that Lawrence Rockefeller wanted it. The White House said, okay, we'll do this for you. And so the Air Force had to go back out and reinvestigate Roswell. And as I pointed out, what they did was the preliminary report was given back in 1994. In 1995, the final report was given, and this is the one that says, no, there was no UFO crash in Roswell. It was just a mogul balloon, and goes through this whole hundreds of pages of material. And the report goes back to Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton makes a speech, and this is where you see this indirect stuff, that really it's nothing direct. It's not the president. He can't talk. He's sworn to secrecy. He's got to play the game that he doesn't know what's going on. So what happens is he sees the final report on that it's the mogul balloon. There's nothing going on. He goes to Belfast, Northern Ireland in late November of 1995. And there's a letter writing competition from kids sending letters to the president. The kids that win the letter writing competition are on the stage with Bill Clinton. So he makes this speech, and he doesn't read the letters from these two kids that win the thing. He reads this letter from Ryan, which is a letter that I've tried numerous times to find. The Clinton Library says they don't have it. He says, Ryan, if you're out in the audience tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, a flying saucer did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. But if the U.S. Air Force did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it, and I want to know. So basically, he's saying indirectly to the U.S. Air Force, I've read the report, and you didn't talk about the bodies. You talked about the mogul balloon. You didn't talk about the bodies. You explain to the people about the bodies. Explain where the bodies came from, these 4-foot-tall aliens, gray aliens. And that's why in 1997, the U.S. Air Force goes and does a second Roswell report, spent $20 million or whatever they spent on the second one. It wasn't because they didn't have anything better to do or they wanted to investigate UFOs. It was because this challenge by Bill Clinton in a speech that said, explain the bodies. So in 1997, they come back and they basically say the bodies are explained by tall 6-foot wooden dummies that were dropped from aircraft with U.S. Air Force uniforms on and with parachutes and with big placards on them that said, if you hand this dummy back in, you'll get $25. And they said, well, they dropped these dummies and some of them, the legs broke off and that made them 4 feet tall. And some of the fingers broke off and that's why they only had 4 fingers. And they put this report out, which basically shut the door on Bill Clinton and on Lawrence Rockefeller, because publicly the president has no place else to go. It basically says, Mr. President, here's the answer to your question about the aliens. And Clinton has to shut up, and he just sort of gives up and stops pushing the issue. The way Lawrence Rockefeller stops pushing the issue is it happens in August of 1995. And according to some of the people I talked to, Lawrence was waiting for this incident to occur because he could get the president away from the CIA in Washington. And in 1995, Bill Clinton is losing the 1996 election. And his campaign manager then was Dick Morris. And Dick Morris determined that the swing voters, which is all you're really interested in a campaign, is the swing voters. You're not interested in Democrats because they're going to vote for Democrats. The Republicans will vote for Republicans. And all you're interested in is the swing voters. And it was determined by Dick Morris in 1995 that the swing voters in the 1995 election were people who were into technology and they were into nature and they were into camping. So the decision was made that Bill Clinton, instead of going to the Hamptons for his summer vacation where he would play golf with his buddies and have parties and meet all his rich buddies, that he would go to the Lawrence Rockefeller Ranch and they would go whitewater rafting and they would go camping and they would go horseback riding because this is what the swing voters were interested in and they wanted to win the election. And Bill Clinton, that was the last place he wanted to go. If you read Dick Morris's report, his book he writes on it, he talks about talking to Bill Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch and he had to hold the phone away from his head because Bill Clinton is screaming on the phone, "Get me out of here." The only reason he was there because the swing voters, and so that was when Lawrence Rockefeller goes to talk to them. And all the indications we have is that the president wasn't in the briefing. He may have been, but we don't think so. But Hillary definitely was in what he calls this briefing. He had gotten a bunch of material from Stephen Greer, and in the Rockefeller documents, you'll see Stephen Greer sends a letter to the White House and says, "I'm on standby if you need material." So they know this is all taking place. The science advisor writes this letter to President Clinton and says, "I just want to warn you, we tried to deal with Lawrence Rockefeller. We tried to answer his questions. We did whatever we could," and basically saying this didn't work out, and now he's coming to you. He's bypassed us. He's going to talk to you at the ranch about UFOs. And I think Bill Clinton doesn't show up because it's this plausible deniability that the president always needs, that he's not involved. So Hillary sits down with Lawrence. Lawrence goes through all this material. He goes through it all. And according to Whitley Strieber and other people that I've talked to who talked to Lawrence Rockefeller, nobody said anything. Hillary sat there and didn't say anything. And the next morning, Hillary comes up to Lawrence Rockefeller and says, "Okay, we listened to you about the issue. Now, don't ever bring up the subject again." And that's why Lawrence Rockefeller was cut off. That Hillary, I believe at that point, realized she had already said in 1992 in the campaign that there would be a woman president by 2010. And she's very publicly said numerous times that when she was 12 years old, she said she would be the president of the United States. She'd be the first woman president. So she's looking in 1995 at this issue that at that time was a toxic issue. And she's saying to Lawrence Rockefeller, "I don't need this. I'm going to run for president. Don't bring up the subject again. We accommodated you. We listened to you. Now don't bring it up." And Rockefeller at that point just sort of throws up his hands and gives up. And the president is cut off by this Roswell report where they come back and they cut him off at the pass. And because publicly there's no other place you can go, they sort of give up. And what they do is they do this executive order thing that John Podesta helps do in 1995, where they try to force out the UFO documents by saying anything that's over 25 pages has to have a good reason to stay classified, otherwise it's all going to come out. And what happens is they figure that the UFO stuff is going to come out. That doesn't come out, but the stuff about putting radioactive elements in kids' cereal and all this kind of stuff, Bill actually has to go in front of the public and explain that they were actually poisoning these kids with radioactive stuff to do these tests. They have all this kind of stuff come out, and a lot of stuff. 800 million pages of documents were declassified by that executive order. And so that's the way they operated it, is you have to sort of come in through the back door to try to force this material, because you can't really say, "I know about the UFO situation and I'm going to force it out." You try to do it through secondary channels, and all the passes were cut off. And Bill Clinton is already at that point in 1997, 1996. He's in the middle of the Monica Lewinsky mess, which is Podesta's trying to get him out of, and he's sort of got better things to do than the UFO thing, and he sort of gives up. He's sort of been cut off at the pass. Hillary's running around talking about the vast right-wing conspiracy that's trying to get rid of her president, her husband, and the UFO issue is sort of put on the back burner, and both Lawrence Rockefeller and the president give up on this initiative to try to get the material out. But it's important to remember that the president did try to help. He did try to get this declassification done through Lawrence Rockefeller and through this executive order in 1995.
And Grant, those swing voters who were people who want to know more about UFOs, who have not bought into the policies of denial, those swing voters knew that the Air Force report, the second one, that claimed that they were dummies, wooden dummies with broken fingers and broken legs, didn't match historical fact because it came out through network news. The news media at least did responsible investigation on that Air Force report, and the news media in general reported that there were no wooden dummies dropped anywhere in Roswell or any place else in July of 1947.
Yeah, and that's why when you look at the material, the more we look at it, the more we realize what's going on. And you can actually see executives that are operating behind the scenes. You see how it's done. It's not done directly where they put the material out. And we mentioned in your intro, you mentioned this fact that Podesta puts out the tweet in February of 2015 where he says, I tried to get UFO disclosure. It was the biggest disappointment. I wasn't able to get it. And he copies Maureen Dowd at the New York Times. Now, Steve Bassett pointed this out to me, and that she was copied. And I said, well, why would he copy her on this? Because she's not really a Clinton supporter. She's a big-time reporter at the New York Times. And it's later that we learn that Maureen Dowd wrote an article in 1997, and it deals with this dummy issue that she was at the release. And she talks about how stupid this report was, that this actually proves that this is real, that there are aliens here. The article is sort of titled that the aliens, it's for real. So she writes this very scathing article about the second Roswell report, saying how stupid do they think we are, that this actually proves that this is for real, that the Air Force is lying. So she does this. So when in 2015, when Podesta does this tweet, he copies her because in her original thing, she says the truth is out there. And this is the famous X-Files comment, the truth is out there. She puts it in her 1997 article and supports the fact that extraterrestrials are here and the government is lying. So in 2015, that's why John Podesta copies her on the tweet. And the general public wouldn't know, but you look very carefully, you can see that John Podesta is trying to encourage her. He's trying to encourage people to talk about this, and it's all being done indirectly, that if you're just watching it without really paying attention, you don't really know what's going on. But in behind the scenes, you can see Podesta and the president are busy trying to move this issue. The same as Barack Obama has done a number of things that indicates that he's unhappy with the secrecy and that he knows what's going on.
Grant, what is in the content of the 1,000 pages of key UFO documents that are now missing from the Clinton Library?
Well, the documents, and as I've pointed out, these aren't like CIA, NSA documents that Stanton Friedman always shows where, there's eight words on a page. The documents that come out of the, came out of the, I should point out because it's a little bit confusing to people. There are two sets of UFO documents. The one is the Rockefeller Initiative documents that I got in 2000. I filed in 2000. I heard that a researcher by the name of Bill Leparle had filed for them and had gotten a couple hundred pages. Then I heard that Bruce Maccabee had filed for them and he had gotten about 500 pages. So when I heard that Bruce Maccabee had filed, and I was already then chasing Ronald Reagan and I was very interested in the presidents, I filed my FOIA with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Now, Bill Clinton is still in office at the time, and there's only two agencies, and one is the Office of Science and Technology Policy that is exempt from freedom of information while the president is in office. What usually happens is that you can't get anything from the White House until 5 years after the president leaves. And then what happens is the president has 5 years to use the documents for his memoirs and whatever he wants. And at the end of 5 years, to the day, January the 20th, 2006, the president, the documents from the Clinton Library start to be released. And the way FOIA stuff is released after the president leaves office is that it's first come, first serve. So if you make an appeal or a FOIA on UFOs and you're the first person in the door, it's the first thing that they declassify. So what happened was in 2006, I already had the 1,000 pages from the Office of Science and Technology Policy in 2000 when Bill was in there. I used those documents and all the names, Les Aspin, Rockefeller, Hillary. I know all these people are involved. I know all the names. So I used the names in those documents. And in 2006, when the FOIA stuff starts coming out in the Clinton Library, I file about maybe 100 FOIAs. I asked for John Podesta's correspondence on UFOs, John Podesta's correspondence with Hillary Clinton, John Podesta's correspondence with the president. And I go through all these different scenarios, hoping that I'm going to pull out some documents that weren't in these initial 1,000 pages of documents. So of the first 18 documents that were declassified in the Clinton library, 11 of them were my FOIAs, and they had to do with Bill Clinton wanting the Sci-Fi channel at Camp David. And this was, he was fascinated with sci-fi and this sort of stuff. So this was one of the FOIAs I filed. I realized that he wanted to watch some particular show. It was some sort of UFO show, and that he had demanded the Sci-Fi channel, and they had to an emergency thing. They had to immediately put in the Sci-Fi channel into Camp David. So I'm filing all these, and that was at the point then when the Washington Post interviews me, Associated Press interviews me, Fox News interviews me, and everybody wants to know, why are there so many UFO documents coming out of the Clinton administration? And the thing was, it was first come, first serve. I got there before everybody else, so I filed all these documents. And it was at that point I started to point out that two of the key documents in the Rockefeller Initiative report, the documents I got in 2000, were these Hillary Clinton documents. The fact that Hillary Clinton had helped edit this letter on UFO disclosure to the president, and that everything that was going from Lawrence Rockefeller to the science advisor, and everything that was going from the science advisor to Lawrence Rockefeller was going through the First Lady's office. She was like the post office. It was all going through her office. And that Lawrence Rockefeller and Scott Jones, when they did the first briefing for the science advisor, it actually gone to Hillary's office after they gave the briefing.
Grant, let's pick this up after the break, both with what was happening right then and Hillary's amazing comments to Damon Steer at the New Hampshire newspaper at the end of December. Grant, given the political complexities of what was happening in the 1990s by President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and Lawrence Rockefeller and all of those pressures trying in their own way to get out the truth about the UFO phenomena, how would you take that past and bring it up to December of 2015 to explain Hillary Clinton's comments to Damon Steer, the reporter at the Conway Daily Sun, in which he even implied that we might even have aliens in the past?
I think it's extremely significant what Hillary's saying. Based upon what I've seen from the 1990s, I was told, I was lecturing at Eureka Springs, I was told by a woman who claimed to be the sister of the person who owned the barbecue restaurant where the Clintons used to hang out in Hot Springs, Arkansas when they were young, said either Hillary and Bill had a sighting or someone very close. That's why they're so interested in UFOs. So they've always been interested in UFOs. And I knew even before Hillary made the statement that something was up. And I always say the key is John Podesta. You don't watch Hillary the puppet, you watch the puppet master. That John Podesta has over the years, time and time again, come out and pushed the issue. Because John Podesta is not just a guy who's interested in X-Files and UFOs. He's a guy who believes in open government, and he honestly believes in open government. It's his main focus. He talks about what Jimmy Carter talked about. The sunshine is the best disinfectant. We need this out, that you cannot, as he's a Madison guy, you cannot govern the people unless the people have the information that they need to know what's going on. So he's been pushing this. 2002, he came to the Sci-Fi News Conference. He said, we should do it. The people can handle it, and it's the law. This is critically important. Now, as you mentioned in your intro, at one point he tells a woman, nice interview with Hillary, next time ask her about the aliens. So even before Hillary made this statement to Damon Steer, I knew something was up. And I said, this is significant because John Podesta is the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. And I know from watching all the campaigns for various presidents that the campaign manager, everything, I mean, going to the bathroom, they poll. I mean, they poll everything. Exactly. You know, everything is, what do the swing voters want? How do we do this? How do we not, blow this up? It's $1 billion campaign. So when John Podesta is making these comments to reporters, sort of indicating, I want you to ask Hillary about the aliens, it indicates that it must be polling well, that there must be some advantage to bringing it up, and that it's safe now to do, and that he's going to push this issue, even though it's in 2008, it was seen as a toxic issue in the presidential election when Kucinich got tagged with the UFO thing. So before Hillary actually made the statement, I knew something was up. I knew that something was going to happen, and that Hillary had an answer, that sooner or later someone was going to ask her. She was prepared to give the answer. So
Grant,
when Damon,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, so when Damon Steer asked her, I was not surprised at all that she made this comment. And it's important in two respects. Linda, you've already mentioned the one, that for the first time, a high-level official has talked about the fact that they actually may be here. The whole scientific debate, and this comes into this time and space thing, that the Rendlesham guys got experienced, was that the main objection by scientists to the UFO phenomena is the time-space argument. You can't get here from there because of time and space restraints. You can't do it. We can't bypass the speed of light and all this kind of stuff. So you have this situation where Hillary actually steps over the line, and she does as Bill does, or other people have talked about it. Oh, I think there may be life in outer space. I believe, this kind of stuff. She actually says they may be here, which was extremely significant. And the other thing that she made was significant was that I had, just before it happened, I had actually given away all the documents. I had given away to another researcher the Rockefeller Initiative, the original documents that I got, all the FOIAs, the Area 51 FOIA that I got from the Clinton administration, all this kind of stuff, because I came to the opinion that the president knows what's going on, but the president's never going to tell you what's going on. And I had sort of gotten frustrated, so I'd given all this material. And when I heard Hillary make this statement that she had made already to Damon Steer in 2007, she said, do you know that the most requested item that was requested at the Clinton Library was UFOs? I suddenly realized that they're paying attention, that they are actually watching what's going on, because those were my FOIAs. And I thought, holy cow, I'd sort of gotten depressed, and I had sort of given up that anybody was paying attention. And suddenly I realized that the First Lady actually was watching what's going on, and she knew this. So you get this situation where from time to time, there's been a couple of times when the actual executive office of the president has been on my website. And it's times like that when you sort of realize that they're watching behind the scenes and they're trying to do something. So Hillary came out, and I can't overemphasize the fact that this is a very important story. And it's very important because for the first time, we actually have a reporter who is, as I described it, he's almost like we have a guy deep inside the Kremlin. This is not just an ordinary reporter. This is a guy who's in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, the way he explains it to me, I've had a number of conversations with Damon Steer. In New Hampshire, some of these people who run for president are there for like a year before it actually goes on. Most states, if you're in Louisiana or North Dakota or Montana, you will never see a presidential campaign in those states because there's no swing state. It's already known whether they're going to vote. So when you get a situation where all these people are in New Hampshire, and you got a guy like Damon Steer who's interested in UFOs and who is not afraid to ask the question, and whose editorial board says, we liked what you did, we want more, you have a situation where every major political guy running for president has to go through the Conway Daily Sun newspaper. He has to sit in front of the editorial board, and he has to smile and answer all the questions, and he can't avoid the questions. And you have a guy now on that board, the political reporter for this newspaper, who will ask the UFO question. And he asked Hillary, and then he asked Kasich, and Kasich said, I don't believe in UFOs. And yesterday he talked to Cruz, and he talked to Cruz about UFOs. And he basically asked him about Hillary's comment that she would send somebody into Area 51 for an investigation. And Cruz said, if I'm elected, I may send an investigation. I may investigate Roswell. And then he showed Cruz one of the two documents from the Rockefeller Initiative documents where Hillary is helping edit this letter to the president. And Cruz was shocked by this document. I've never seen this document before. And you still have the big guys. You have Sanders and you have Trump, who still have to go to this office and face the UFO question. So I'm saying this thing's not over by a long shot. You're going to see a lot of UFO news coming before February the 6th or whenever this caucus takes place in New Hampshire. And it's not just this year. 4 years from now, Damon Steer will still be in this editorial office, and he will still be asking the UFO question, and they have to answer it. And that changes everything, because these are high-profile people that everybody's listening to. And I'm sure when everybody hears that Cruz said that he might send someone to investigate Area 51, everybody's going to go, what? He said that? Are you sure he said that? And people are going to pay attention, and the more we talk about it, the closer we get to disclosure.
First of all, Grant, I want to clarify something based on your research, because to me, I've been listening really closely for the last hour. Number one, you kind of imply that Rockefeller and Clinton don't know what's going on, or at least early on. It sounds like Rockefeller was being kept out of the loop and was trying to force the hand of, the people inside to give him some information based on the fact that he would threaten to go to the press. He had the money to do it and everything else. But based on your research, are you implying that the presidents, even through Clinton and now today, have a much better understanding of what's going on, but are blocked by national security, number one? And that's my next question to you. Podesta says it's the law, but national security trumps everything. So in essence, they're not violating the law if the people we put in power can deem this to be national security. Am I correct?
Correct. I've changed my opinion. I've worked on the presidents for 30 years. I used to say, like everybody, based upon Bill Clinton's statement to Sarah McClendon, Sarah, there's a government inside the government and I don't control it. I went along with this idea that the president doesn't know what's going on. Absolutely do not believe that anymore. I believe the president knows exactly what's going on. He is I point out four things. He is the head of state. If you're dealing with a foreign power, aliens, you can't. The only person that can negotiate with them, sign treaties and negotiate with them, is the head of state. That's the president. So you can't have a GS-13 guy doing some negotiation or interacting with a foreign power. He's also the chief executive officer of the government. So everything that happens in the government goes up to him. He's the head of the 17 intelligence agencies. That's all the intelligence agencies do, is provide, as Chase Brandon said, they provide material for the people at 60,000 feet. That's the president. They work for the president. They don't work for the CIA or anything. All the material goes up to the president. And the other one is he's the civilian commander of the military. And the military people are people who follow the law. They follow the rules. They salute and do what they're told. And there's no way that I would say that the military would violate their oath to not send stuff up the chain of command. So you have a situation, and the example that I point out that shows that this is the president is in charge and the president does know what's going on is the fact that in 9/11, when Bush decided he was going to tap the phones of Americans to pick up terrorist phone calls, the Attorney General resigned, the FBI director resigned, 12 people in the Justice Department resigned, and they said, we don't care what the president says, we're resigning because this is illegal. And I say there have been 7 Democratic administrations and 6 Republican administrations that have handled the UFO situation, and they've all done exactly the same thing, which comes to the security element. When the president is briefed in November after he gets elected, 2 weeks after he gets elected, he gets the intelligence briefing. When they come in to give him the intelligence briefing, which may involve the UFO stuff, he signs the security oath before he gets the briefing. And the president is the last guy that's going to break security. So I believe the president knows what's going on. He's involved in the policy and stuff like that, but his hands are tied by security. So when I asked Dick Cheney, who has always been rumored as one of the guys who knows exactly what's going on, I said, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed? So when I say, wait, when you're dealing with a high-level guy, you don't want to know if he's seen UFOs or what he thinks about UFOs. You ask him, did you get the UFO briefing? And that's what I said to Cheney. In all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? If so, what was it and what were you told? And Cheney said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified and I wouldn't be talking about it. And that's how it works. The president his hands are tied by security, so he has to use these backdoor methods to try to get the material out. So that's why he uses the executive order to try to force out these documents that are over 25 years. That's why Jimmy Carter sent his press secretary to the FBI to force the FBI to reveal how they were doing UFO. He sent people to the CIA to because there was an FOA, and the girl that was in the CIA actually breaks down crying because she's under so much pressure because the CIA people are playing these games with the documents, and she's under pressure from the White House to get these documents out. The president can't say, I know what's going on, this is what I'm doing, but he'll use backdoor methods to try to force it out, and that's what was happening with the Rockefeller Initiative. So when they slammed the door on President Clinton on the two Roswell reports, he can't do anything more. He can't come out and say, I know what's going on. He's tried through the executive order and through these two Roswell reports to get the material to the people, and the agencies shut the door on him, and he just throws his hands up because he's in trouble with all sorts of scandals and just sort of gives up and leaves it to the next administration.
So what do you think could happen now if today, in the getting toward the end of January and close to the first primaries, that Hillary Clinton has talked with the Conway Daily Sun, and now the same reporter, Damon Steer, has talked with Cruz, who's saying that he might do an investigation of Area 51. What could these primaries and this reporter and these questions of candidates that are now willing to even say they would look into UFOs in Area 51, what pressure could that bring on Barack Obama and the current administration?
Well, I believe, again, Brock has made a number of statements that indicate he knows what's going on. 2012 in Roswell, he said, he talks about the question that's asked to him most is, what's the deal with Roswell? Is it for real? And he said, we'll keep our secrets here. He told Will Smith's son, Jaden, I can neither confirm nor deny that extraterrestrials have visited the Earth, but if they had, and if there had been a top secret meeting, it would have taken place right here, and he's in the situation room with him. He said what happened here. So it's the same thing. His hands are tied. So he's trying to indirectly do this kind of stuff. I think, as what happened with the Hillary Clinton story, that this thing could unravel very, very fast, this disclosure type thing. Because what happened is Damon Steer told me, when he wrote the article, he had to go to another meeting. He quickly handed the article and took off for another meeting. He said he knew something might happen, but he didn't realize it would go viral the way it did. There was like all over the world. It was like everybody and people, media phoning him and stuff like that. And I'm saying that when Trump gets asked the question and when Sanders gets asked the question, then it's going to be news. And what's going to happen is you're suddenly going to get reporters at the Washington Post and the New York Times who are going to suddenly realize we've been had, and they're going to start asking questions of the president, of different agencies, and this thing could unravel very, very fast.
Okay, Nick Grant, a couple of things that I'm curious about. Number one, all right, it's been held back for so long. Okay, now, in your opinion, based on your research, the president, and his staff have a good understanding of what we're dealing with, and it's been classified national security, which means that there's somebody keeping them besides the security oath, because as you can see down along the line, through the years and over the different presidencies, they found a way to get around this. Yeah. Who is holding this back then? In your opinion, who is keeping the leader of the free world from coming out and allowing this to come out? Who's behind this? That's the first question I have.
It's basically the security. The president doesn't talk about anything. He doesn't talk about which countries have been overthrown, which leaders have been killed. The president gets a top secret 45-minute briefing every day of his administration. He doesn't talk about any top secret stuff. So it's just a part of the game that they play. And the story that I told, Linda knows, we had a discussion about this. You can even get to the Senate Appropriations Committee, that people below the president know what's going on. And the prime story that I always tell is the story of Dick D'Amato, who was hired by the Senate Appropriations Committee when Bob Lazar, this story broke at Area 51. Senator Byrd, who was sympathetic to the UFO issue, said to the people on the Senate Appropriations Committee, he said, are we doing Area 51 UFO stuff? Are we back engineering stuff? Because if we are, we hand out the money. We're the Appropriations Committee, and we don't know what's going on. So they hired Dick D'Amato, who is an NSA lawyer, and he goes to Area 51. He investigates, he talks to all the people. He gets on Area 51, and he comes back, and he has this meeting, which if you look at the citizens hearing, you listen to Jesse Marcel Jr. tells this story. He comes to Jesse Marcel Jr., and he says to Jesse Marcel, I want to talk to you about Roswell. And Jesse said, okay, fine. He said, let's go to a secure room. And Jesse said, well, I'm not going to tell you anything I haven't told you before. We don't really need a secure room. And he said, no, maybe I have something I want to tell you. And this is a lawyer for the Senate Appropriations Committee who's done this major investigation and who's told all the people that he dealt with, I have every security clearance there is. I can override any security clearance that you have signed to. And he goes and he goes to the secure room in the sub-basement of the Capitol with Jesse Marcel Jr. And he has a book on the table, which is the book Majestic, which was written by Whitley Strieber. And it talks about MJ-12 and Roswell. Jesse sits down and Dick D'Amato taps the book. And he said, I just want to let you know that this is for real. And Jesse says, I know it's for real. So when are you going to tell the people? And Dick D'Amato says, if it were up to me, I would have told the people yesterday, but it's not up to me. I'm just here to determine and get the cost of the security for this program. So if you got this guy going along with it, it's basically everybody salutes and they realize that this is security. They go along with it. They may have a little piece of the program, but everybody just believes that they're doing the right thing, that this is the law, and they go along with it. If people didn't believe it was the law, that there was some secret part of the government, that the president wasn't in charge, I say people would defect. The reason that people aren't defecting, as they did with the 9/11 thing, is that everybody just believes they've got a piece of it and that it's national security and you got to shut up.
Okay, so they have to shut up, so they base this on national security. Based on your research, why would they feel it's national security then?
Well, they've been told. They've sworn to secrecy. The same as when you were in the military. There's certain things that you won't talk about because you're not going to be a traitor. And I always have problems with deep throat sources. I've never had one come to me because if a deep throat source comes to you and says, "Okay, I was in the highest ranks and I'm going to tell you what's going on," I would say, "Are you a patriotic American?" They would say, "Yeah," and I'd say, "So you swore a secrecy that you would uphold the Constitution and that you would keep secret what you were told certain things." And the guy says, "Yeah." And then, well, if you violated that, you lied to your own government, why would you tell me the truth? The thing is, people will just basically salute and do what they're told. So the president knows the thing, but they're trying to find a way. I was told indirectly in the last couple of months from somebody who has a connection to Barack Obama that they are in the background and they are trying to figure a way to get this thing out. But they don't want, as I was told, they don't want the government's fingerprints on it. They want to find some way to get this out where it breaks, where they aren't sort of held responsible for it. They are in a very difficult position. I say that they are in a position where they got stuck with this thing and they realize all the things that could go south if this thing gets released. And it's sort of like, it's almost like the economy. You can just keep kicking it down the road and hope that it'll sort of go away, that you really don't want to deal with it. And so that you can tell the president, okay, let's drill another oil well. There's only 5% unemployment. It's not the end of the world. The longer you delay this thing, the more information we're going to have. And the president just goes along with this, and everybody just sort of goes along with it. But nobody's going to violate their security oath if you know, the same as they don't violate their security oath on 101 other secrets that they have.
Right, but we're getting ready to go to a break, but when we come out of the break, this is what I'd like maybe you to explain. I mean, it's clear they made it national security, okay, that these guys are held up by their oaths and stuff. But what is these intelligence agencies, what is the reasoning they're considering is what I kind of like to go with you, have you go with your research. Why would they consider this so vital that they would classify this and not even allow any of it to come out to this day overall? I mean, there's got to be something behind there that they firmly believe.
There is, yes.
That is the reason why they can get away with this, and that's what I'd like to hear when we come out of a break. So we're due for a break, and when we come back, I'd like to hear your what you've done in your research behind that. Grant, when we went to break, my question to you was this: it's been held back. The president and the cabinet or whatever have had this held back as far as being able to talk about it. I kind of glean from what you said, most of them, or at least the president level, has an idea of what we're dealing with, and some of them would like to get this out, but it's being held back by the intelligence agencies or somewhat inside the intelligence agencies. And my question to you was, A, what is the reason the intelligence agencies are using this? I understand that when you sign a document that you can't talk about it, you can be, brought up on charges, but they have to be justifying this to the president and the people they're asking. And then number two, a follow-up after that is, why have things changed now? Why, just because the American opinion and we're more on social media, why would all of a sudden, after you explain why the justification you're using, why should we believe that somebody new that would be elected was going to be able to do anything more than the last person who hasn't been able to?
Okay. First of all, as to why the president and all these people go along, I wrote an article. It's on my website. It's called "The Reasons the Government Has Decided Not to Tell You the Truth." It used to be called the 64 Reasons. And I go through all these different scenarios as to why they would go along with this, why the intelligence agencies have told the president you have to keep this secret. I think the number one thing has to do with the technology. It has to do with what's called lead time in weapons. That during World War II, as an example, we had the atomic bomb. We dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, and the Japanese go to the emperor and they say, they're dropping this atomic bomb on us, and what do we got to do? And the emperor says, okay, let's build a bomb and we'll drop it on them. And he says to them, okay, how long is it going to take us to build the bomb? And they say, 8 or 10 years. Well, you haven't got 8 or 10 years. And that's the key thing in weapons development is lead time. How far are you ahead of your opposition if you have to use a secret weapon? And you try to keep it secret that you're not working on it. So you have a situation where you don't want to put your cards on the table. You want somebody else to put your cards on the table before you do. And Scott Jones tells the story. The guy who went in to do the briefing for the president, the science advisor, he worked for Claiborne Powell, and the senator. And his job was to run around to different countries in the world, and he was into paranormal phenomena and stuff, and he would write this daily report to the senator. And he went to the Chinese, and he said to the Chinese at the highest level, he said to them, why don't you guys disclose? And they said, when the Americans disclose, we'll be a close second. And so they want the Americans to put their cards down, and the Americans want everybody else to put their cards down, because what you want is you're missing part of the thing. They don't have all the answers. There's a big consciousness aspect, how they fly the ship. They fly the ship with the mind. There's all this kind of stuff which I don't think they understand. So when you're telling the president, we have these aspects, and I say to people who are pushing for disclosure, I say, do you really want to give this stuff to Al-Qaeda or to ISIL or to North Korea? Because you can see right now with North Korea that eventually, if this technology can be used for bad purposes, eventually North Korea will buy it from Russia or China or somebody will sell it to them. So it's that aspect of all the things that can go wrong that the intelligence agencies will say to the president, let's delay this. It's not that they're saying they don't want it out. And so you're forced in a situation where John Podesta says it's the law, and they sort of want it out. And that's when I was told that they want this out, but they don't want the government fingerprints. They want experiencers and other people to sort of bring this out. I still don't think it's going to work, because eventually, as soon as it becomes known that this thing's for real, you have the situation where the president is standing in front of 5,000 reporters, and they say to him, Mr. President, what about cattle mutilations? What are you doing? There's been 10,000 cattle mutilations. And if the president agrees that he knew about this, then you get 10,000 lawsuits about cattle mutilations, or there's been millions of people who have been abducted. You're constitutionally responsible for the protection of the American people. What are you doing to stop these abductions? The president really doesn't know. He can't stop all this. And so the president is in a situation where you don't want to put the president in front of the American people where he doesn't have the answers to various questions that are involved. He knows certain aspects of it, but you don't want him put in front of the people where he's going, because what's going to happen is if you suddenly get a meltdown of the stock market, you have to assure the people you have it under control before you open the stock market again. And they don't have it under control. The aliens are running the show. So the president's in this dilemma where it's the law. He's trying to sort of indirectly release this stuff. And I actually wrote a book called UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informants, where I go through a number of scenarios where they actually leaked material into the UFO community. The Area 51 story, for example, was a leak. It had been shown on a documentary that was funded, I believe, by Ronald Reagan in October of 1988, long before Lazar ever went on there. And in this, the screenshot where they show this scenario of how the chain of command command from the president on down, they show Area 51. This was long before anybody ever got to Area 51. So they're indirectly leaking stuff. They want you to know that there's been back engineering, there's been flying saucers, all this sort of stuff. But it's that classified aspect of the weapons and all this kind of stuff where you don't want to put your stuff on the table, because when you put your stuff on the table, you may give the Russians the 20% they need. Now they have the whole story, and you've only got 80%, and then they've got the weapons.
Bob Bigelow came on George Knapp's show a couple years ago, and part of the interview, he went in and says, confirmation trumps disclosure, basically. And what he was trying to say is, we need to confirm that we're not alone, which is, to me, the more you talk today, they're trying to do that. But then the people have to accept that is that we're not alone, that there's something going on, but we're not going to go into the nuts and bolts of it for different reasons, to include, like you said, giving our hand to the Russians giving it to us and all that, and the weapons behind it. So in some ways that they want to be able to try to get to do this, and having him do that consistently, he is in the space program, and what he's doing is they're trying to tell everybody, listen, folks, I think most people understand we're probably not alone, and here's kind of the proof in the documents, but you got to stop there for right now because we can't open up Pandora's box.
What is changing, just picking up on what John just asked, what is changing right now in January of 2016 that there would be all of what appears to be pressure through the New Hampshire newspaper, Hillary, Cruz, these questions that seems like something is trying to push its way out no matter what the consequences?
I think a big player is John Podesta. John Podesta is the most powerful Democrat. He started the big Democratic think tank, the Center for American Progress. He's the smartest guy in the room, and he's very, very powerful. And I think it's John Podesta who's basically pushing this, because when he talks about this tweet, he basically indicates that he and Barack talked about it in 2014, and I still can't. My biggest disappointment, I'm still not able to get it out. So they have the discussion. They say, is there a way that we can declassify this stuff? And the president goes, no, we're still, our hands are tied. So Podesta leaves the administration, and he puts out this tweet because he's told the Washington Post, he said, I know people are filing FOIs on me, and that's me. I'm watching everything he does. So he's basically putting on the record saying, I tried to get it out, I couldn't get it out. They are in a dilemma because Stan Freeman has made this argument that you can let it out and say we're not going to talk anymore about this kind of stuff. It's not going to happen. There's going to be like bedlam. There's going to be all sorts of questions asked, and even just to identify where certain research is going on will set the Russians and the Chinese to start to watch that area. Where are we doing the UFO research? What cities is it being done in? This sort of stuff. And you mentioned Bigelow. When he did that interview, I had just been interviewed by George Knapp, and that's why George Knapp asked him the question, because I came out with this scenario that the government is declassifying stuff. And he asked Bigelow, he said, do you think the government is actually releasing stuff? And he said yes, and he talked about proprietary information that we in the business community, we paid money. So the business community can hold it back. They can say, this is proprietary, we spent this type of stuff, and we're not going to release the rest of it. The government is in a bit of a different dilemma in that the taxpayers have paid for this sort of stuff. I as much as I've heard from behind the scenes that they are going to try to push this thing out, get somebody outside the government to force this issue out, I still think they're in a lot of trouble once it comes out, because you cannot stop the declassified stuff, the classified stuff from being exposed once it becomes known that the government's been lying for 70 years.
So here we go. We've got this dilemma. You've got the Hillary Clinton and Podesta working their magic. They're trying to get more out.
Well, I should clarify. I don't think Hillary is. Hillary is doing what she's told to do. I think if Hillary gets in, she will do absolutely nothing. So let's put that on the record. Hillary is she's trying to get elected. And that's what elections are about. They're not about trying to save the world. It's about going in there and pretending that you're the Messiah or you're Santa Claus and get people, I'm going to give you 13 million jobs, I'm going to give you free education, free health care, and everybody decides they're going to elect you. You get in, and then you try to see what you can do. But you can't, they're just trying to get votes. So I don't believe Hillary's trying to. Bill's really interested. I'm not sure Hillary's all that interested, and she's going to be the same sort of thing. That she was in the she was Secretary of State. She's had access to some of this stuff. She didn't expose it either. So I don't think she's really going to do anything. It's John Podesta who is the guy who is pushing it, because he's this big Madison guy, believing that open government, however it unravels, is the way you have to go. It's the law. That's what he said in 2002, and he's the one that's willing to push this issue out. I'm not sure Hillary is really that interested in it.
So kind of what you're implying, I'm just trying to get this straight, is that there are certain people that would like more to come out.
Yeah.
That Hillary herself, even though she made a comment, I guess that she said that we may have been visited, which, interesting enough, Edgar Mitchell said the same thing on a radio interview he did a few years ago. But the interesting thing about that one is that he said there's probably life on other planets, yet that hasn't gotten here, but we have been visited, which I've never been able to get to the bottom of that one.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, all these guys are just basically pushing for votes, knowing that ultimately when they get into the power, they're going to sign these disclosure paperwork, and they're just going to have their hands tied no differently than anyone else. So ultimately, what is going to be, like as you just said, you think things are maybe going to get out of control. What's going to push that over the top then, if the person who gets elected is not going to do anything more other than make promises just like they did before?
Well, it comes down to the change in the media, where right now the major media will not touch the issue. They will not ask the question. There's the example that was shown was Deborah Orrin, who was a reporter for the New York Post. When Webster Hubbell came out in 1997, he wrote the book Friends in High Places, and he comes out in his book and he says, when I was there in the Justice, Clinton said to me, if I put you over there as the Assistant to Justice, there's two things I wanted you to do for me. Number one, who killed JFK, and are there UFOs? So he makes this public. And Deborah Orrin goes into she's a White House reporter, she goes in and she asks the question, what about this statement? And the press secretary walks around this statement that Bill asked Webster Hubbell to go out and do it. She says, she comes back with a follow-up and she says, is it true what Webster Hubbell writes in his book? And the press secretary says, we will not answer questions about what private people put in their private books. And she said, I sat there and I waited for somebody in the White House press corps to follow up, and they all rolled over and played dead, because it's the dumb question. You don't want to lose your press pass by asking the UFO question. I think that's going to change as soon as you get like Trump making a comment or Sanders making a comment where somebody says something positive, where suddenly everybody it's not the dumb question to ask anymore, and people start asking questions. I don't know how it's going to unravel, because as I said, it's a situation which is very delicate, where a lot of things can go wrong. And that if you read my paper on the 64 reasons, I say that if I were to give you the briefing, you do exactly what they do, because they've all done the same thing, that there's just so many complications to this issue about not knowing certain aspects, and about the weapons, and about all the stuff that might go south, and panic breaking out, or people starting to sell in the stock market. There's so many things, and politicians are gutless wonders. They want to make sure that everything is going to go the right way. They don't really take chances. The way disclosure takes place, whether it's African American civil rights or women's right to vote or gay rights, it comes from the bottom up, that you get this huge pressure. And Stephen Greer was told this when he went on the Hill. He went to all the senators and congressmen, and so did James Fox, and they were told the same thing. We're on your side. A lot of the congressmen and senators said, we're for you, but you have to provide us some cover. You've got to give us. You get the parade going. One of the senators said, you got the parade going, and we'll lead the parade, as long as there's no support. So right now, there's really no support for the UFO issue, so nobody's going to get it. They put their finger up, get the wind, and see that people are interested in the immigration issue. They're interested in employment, and that's the way they sort of get the votes to get in. When it comes to
Grant, why is John Podesta pushing this right now?
Because he's a Madison guy. If you read his material, he wrote an article, he made a speech in 1998, which I suggest you read. It was to the security people, to the NSA and CIA. He makes a big speech to them, and he talks about security versus the right to know. He is a guy who believes absolutely firmly, despite anything, that the people need to know what's going on, that you can't run a government when the people don't know what's going on. He believes that sunshine is the best disinfectant. He believes it is the law, and it looks like to me that he's ready to roll the dice on the UFO issue. He's polled it. He wouldn't have had Hillary talk about it unless he had polled it. And he thinks that the issue can go positive. And even if it does, Steve Bassett makes the same argument, that despite whatever bad scenario there is behind the scenes that they're going to have to reveal, you're going to have to eventually reveal it, so you might as well reveal it now and start to deal with it. That openness is the ultimate thing. It's the law. It's what we should do, and forget about all the things of trying to procrastinate and find reasons not to do it. We should do it because it's the law, and the people should know what's going on. They're paying the bill. And that's what I say. Podesta's the guy behind us. He's the guy that's pushing it, and he's the most powerful Democrat that there is.
I agree with him completely, which leads to, if, as you just said, the non-humans, the intelligences that have been interacting with this planet for so long, are really in charge, what do the non-humans want from humans and this planet?
I say that they're doing the same thing. As I say, if you look at this new Edgar Mitchell's free survey, 41% of all experiencers are getting downloads. The aliens are giving them all sorts of material, technical material, scientific material, all this kind of stuff. The aliens are doing the same thing. They're doing this indirect thing. They're not coming down like Santa Claus and saying, okay, here we are, here's what you're going to do. They're doing this indirect thing. They're indirectly leaking the ideas of and coming through the bottom. They're coming through the bottom, going up to the top. And so the Americans, I believe, have learned this lesson, and they're doing the same thing. They're indirectly dragging people along piece by piece. But the aliens are basically running the show, but they are part of the cover-up. They are doing the same thing. They realize that you can't just come down and do your kids' homework. People have to learn the lessons, so they're indirectly giving these messages about time and space and all this kind of stuff. They're allowing people to fly the ship. They're teaching people to levitate stuff. They're doing all this stuff with psychic phenomena and stuff like that. And you can see the aliens are interacting, but as they told an experiencer, an abductee in 1967, we want you to know, but just a little bit. So this is a principle where you gradually release it. You can't shock the people with, okay, here's the whole story and drop it. And the Americans, I say, the government has been, and the aliens have been since day one. The first sighting that ever occurred, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, Kenneth Arnold stated he was getting telepathic messages in his head. They've been doing this since day one, indirectly revealing stuff to people and dragging us along, trying, and to me, they're alarm clocks. They're saying the nuclear weapons is a problem, but more importantly, the ecology is the problem. That is, Neil Young said in his song that he wrote in 1968, we're treating the world like a gold rush, and when the gold is gone, the world is going to become a ghost town, and the silver seeds, the flying saucers are going to come, and they're going to take the chosen ones to another planet. This is what you see a lot of experiencers are talking about, this idea that they have this thing, that there's some sort of event that's about to take place, some sort of catastrophic event, and some have described even 1 billion people dying, that there's something about to happen, and the aliens are like an alarm clock. They're trying to give us the warning. They're trying to get this message across through experiencers, and these experiencers are talking about this. And the government has to know this kind of stuff because they're watching experiencers as well.
Grant, what is the alarm clock trying to go off to warn about?
Well, almost all experiencers are shown this screen. You can ask them, did you see the screen on the ship? Yes, they showed me the screen. And the screen shows these catastrophic flood scenarios, dead people all over the place. And a lot of experiencers will say, they'll argue with the aliens. They're going to say, you're training for me for this stuff. And I don't remember. Quit, leave me alone. I don't know what you're doing. And the aliens always have the same thing. When the time is right, you'll know what to do. So I always ask the experiencers, do you think it will happen in your lifetime? And they will all say the same thing. I think, yes, this will happen in my lifetime because I'm being trained to do something, whether it's crowd control or whether it's interpretation, or they all think they have a sort of a different mission, that there is something about to happen on this planet, some sort of catastrophic thing, and that the aliens are indirectly warning us through experiencers, through millions of experiencers, giving them these messages that you guys have to straighten it out. You have to straighten this out before it's too late.
Or will they intervene and help us?
No, they can't. When I first started, I went after the Canadian government. And the Canadian government, the guy that ran the Canadian government UFO program from 1950 to 1954 was an experiencer. He had interactions with two different aliens. One was named Alpha. This is the one that the CIA channeled in 1959, July of 1959. That Alpha was the one that he had contact with. The other was Tyla. Tyla was the craft that went around and cleaned up the nuclear contamination that we were doing with the nuclear weapons. And Wilbur Smith, who ran the Canadian government program, talked numerous times about nuclear weapons and that we've got to stop this and that the aliens are telling us to stop this. But he said, he was asked the question, will they intervene? And he said he was told by Alpha, no, they will never intervene except for a nuclear war, and that's to save the planet. And that they could stop a nuclear war. They could take the moon in front of the entire world, split it in half, and put it back in front of the entire world to prove they could stop a nuclear weapon. But other than that, they will allow things to unravel, they will allow us to stew in our own juices. You cannot go into another civilization and interfere with that civilization. We have to learn the lessons, and even if we destroy the world, we will go someplace else and learn our lessons. We have to learn the lessons. They are intervening indirectly through people that I believe have volunteered in a reincarnation type event to come in and help them give this message, but they are not interfering. It is part of the international or the interplanetary laws that you can't interfere with somebody else's evolution, and that's what the Canadians said. They will allow us to stew in our own juices. They're just giving us the warnings that unless you stop, this is what's going to happen.
Wow. Well, I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, it's we've got to wrap the show up. Grant, what's on your agenda in the next few months?
I'm doing the Consciousness Expo in Los Angeles next month. This is the first time I've ever lectured to a non-UFO crowd, and I'm going to go through the whole quantum physics thing about what I think is the reality of how quantum physics is backing up what UFO people have been saying about time and space and the physical universe and consciousness, and I'm going to go through all that and tie it into the UFO, that it's all the same stuff. Consciousness is the basic part of the universe, and I'm working on about 5 or 6 books. I'm doing one on this download thing where downloads through Nobel Prizes, through music, through all this kind of stuff, that a lot of the aliens are helping us in terms of giving us ideas. And I've got a book coming out on the connection between rock music and aliens, which there's already been one book, but it's a fascinating story. How many major musicians claim to be experiencers and claim to be putting lyrics in songs that they're getting from somewhere else. So I've got a number of books on the go, and the presidential stuff, I guess I'm going to have to do. I gave up on it, gave all my documents away, but I guess I'm going to have to keep close tabs on this story, because I think this is a big story. The Hillary Clinton story is being way underestimated. It's a big, big story. It's not over by a long shot. Next couple of weeks, you're going to see a lot of things changing.
Well, in that case, I mean, it's like I think the key to this may be Donald Trump. I'd be curious to see what he has to say, since the Donald, as they like to call him, seems to have the nation, his heart, or whatever you want to say. But I want to thank you for coming on, Grant.
Missiles in outer space. If they would miss then they had these 1 megaton sprint missiles that would be shot up, and they had this huge field of these missiles where they would try to stop the Russians from taking out these missile silos in North Dakota. So what happened is later, and this is only a couple of years ago, I learned this, that in November of 1975, they had negotiated with the Russians to take out the anti-ballistic missile unit, and they started taking the missiles out in November of 1975, and that's when the sightings stopped. So from February till November of 1975, that's when they were putting in these new missiles. That's when all the UFOs showed up. That's when we saw the UFOs. And after they took the missiles out, the UFOs went away and didn't come back. So I knew there was this very definite connection between what was going on the north side of the U.S.-Canadian border and what was going on in terms of nuclear weapons. So when I was looking at the Rendlesham Forest story, because I was interested in criminology and how the Russian government worked and how the Kremlin worked, I was aware of the story that in December of 1980, when Rendlesham Forest occurred, that in Poland, Lech Walesa and the Solidarity Unit had taken over the country, and that they had made a threat that they were going to pull away from Russia. And this was one of the many satellite countries around Russia. And Russia had made a stand that they would not allow Poland to leave. It would be the first country to leave. That if Poland were to leave, then you would have Hungary and Yugoslavia, and all these other countries would decide that they're going to leave as well. So the Russians had put a number of regiments of troops on the Polish border. And there was this standoff in December of 1980 when Rendlesham Forest happened. And they were threatening to go in. Now, we don't have all the records. You would actually need to look at the State Department records and the records of the American ambassador to Poland to find out exactly what was going on behind the scenes. But it occurred to me the same sort of thing as this very unstable situation in North Dakota in 1975 where the Americans have lost the war and they're trying to figure out what the Russians are going to do next. What I immediately assumed is that was why the Rendlesham Forest incident had occurred, because they had the forward-based nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. And it was not made public. It was not known till later that they actually had these missiles there. It was illegal to have nuclear weapons on the UK soil. And that for some reason, somebody in the government had decided that we might have to do something to stop the Soviet Union from reinvading Poland. And there would be this standoff that you and I wouldn't know about, but behind the scenes there would be cables going back and forth between the Russians and the Americans with these threats about don't dare go into the country, and that all these forward-based nuclear weapons would be on alert, that somebody would be thinking about this, and that the aliens would know what's going on. And that's why I interpreted that they may have shown up at Rendlesham Forest, and you got these incidents where they were shooting these beams of light down into the weapon storage areas, that they may have actually been disarming these missiles that would be used in this standoff on the Polish-Russian border. One of the confusions is that people who were in the WSA in that period of time, like Rick Bobo apparently was there on what was midnight, December 27th, going into the early morning of the 28th, when Halt was out there with the tape recorder and all of those people. He insists on the record that even though he was seeing a moon size, he said it was looked to his eyes like a full moon that was vivid red and blue light in the sky, and he tried to report it to Central Security Control, and they kept telling him that everything was being handled because they had investigators in the forest. He saw lights leave that red-blue large area. He knows that we are trying to be helpful in responding to his concerns about UFOs and human potential, and that we're keeping an open mind about such matters. But I've made no secret about my conviction that we must not be too diverted from more earthly imperatives, close quote. That was John Gribben's science advisor addressing the memo to President Bill Clinton about Lawrence Rockefeller's inquiry, wanting Bill Clinton as the new president to open up UFOs. Well, during that August 1995 vacation of the Clintons with Lawrence Rockefeller at the Wyoming ranch, Hillary was photographed carrying a newly published book entitled Are We Alone? Philosophical Implications of the Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life by theoretical physicist and astrobiologist Paul Davies. Canadian researcher and author Grant Cameron, who produces the excellent history website presidentialufo.com, was able to retrieve documents through the Freedom of Information Act that showed Rockefeller was soliciting help from Hillary's staff on drafting a document to President Bill Clinton in 1995. And the title of that Rockefeller document was, quote, Lifting Secrecy on Information about Extraterrestrial Intelligence as Part of the Current Classification Review, close quote. Whatever happened in conversation between Rockefeller and Hillary Clinton, the Clinton administration did not break open revelations about UFOs and ETs. But last year, in 2015, Hillary's and Bill's good friend and advisor, John Podesta, had been working as a counselor to President Barack Obama when Hillary decided she was going to run for president. On February 13th, 2015,
Podesta resigned from the Obama administration to begin working for Hillary and tweeted at 8:55 a.m. that morning when he left the White House, quote, John Podesta at Podesta 44, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again not securing the disclosure of the UFO files. Hashtag the truth is still out there. And he copied his tweet to New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd. Then 8 months later, on September 29th, 2015, Podesta tweeted again about UFOs. This time he was congratulating TV actress Lena Dunham about her interview with Hillary Clinton for Dunham's email newsletter called Lenny. Podesta tweeted, quote, great interview at Lena Dunham, but Lena, ask her about aliens next time and put 2 exclamation marks, close quote. 3 months after that, during campaigning in Conway, New Hampshire, Hillary was talking with reporter Damon Steer at the Conway Daily Sun. He had asked Hillary about UFOs in her 2007 presidential campaign, and now asked her again in his December 2015 interview. He reported Hillary said with enthusiasm, quote, yes, I am going to get to the bottom of it, close quote. Back in 2007, Hillary told the same New Hampshire reporter that the, quote, number one topic of Freedom of Information requests that her husband, former Lawrence Rockefeller, a brother in the family of David and Nelson Rockefeller, invited a dozen of us investigating UFOs to his JY Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on September 14 to 15, 1993. He called it a UFO roundtable. By then, Bill Clinton had been U.S. president for 9 months. The group of us had been invited to talk candidly with Mr. Rockefeller about our various research efforts ranging from animal mutilations, human abductions, crop formations, telepathy, ESP, to government and military policies of lies and denial about the alien presence interacting with Earth. What we did not know was that Lawrence Rockefeller, with the help of retired Naval Intelligence Officer C.B. Scott Jones, had prepared an ad to be placed in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and a few other major newspapers that read, quote, Mr. President, meaning Bill Clinton, on the subject of UFO phenomena, what do you know? When did you learn it? Have you shared it with Congress? When will you talk to the American people about it? The subject is as important as any we will ever face. Don't try to go it alone. This information belongs to the world, close quote. This was Lawrence Rockefeller's velvet glove threat behind the pressures he was putting on newly elected President Bill Clinton to open up the government's UFO files to the public. Mr. Rockefeller knew that then Chief of Staff John Podesta was a big supporter of disclosing the truth of UFOs, and he knew that Bill and Hillary Clinton wanted to know more as well. 2 years went by after that gathering of us researchers without Lawrence Rockefeller's ad appearing nationwide in major newspapers. Perhaps because President Clinton seemed to be trying in his own way to go around the classified blocks of intelligence agencies. On April 17, 1995, Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12958. That would require his intelligence agencies to allow for the declassification of all documents 25 years or older back to 1970. And that would be provided they did not compromise nuclear secrets or other security concerns. That 1995 August, it appears that Hillary Clinton sat down alone with Lawrence Rockefeller to talk about UFO ET disclosure when the Clintons vacationed at the Rockefeller Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Apparently, President Clinton did not participate because his science advisor, John Gibbons, wrote in a memo that Lawrence Rockefeller, quote, will want to talk with you about his interest in extrasensory perception, paranormal phenomena, and UFOs. Soon after you were inaugurated, Les Aspin and Mel Laird referred Lawrence to me concerning the famous Roswell incident dating from 1947, in which UFO buffs claimed a flying saucer crashed near the town of Roswell, New Mexico, and that the U.S. Air Force had classified the entire event, beginning a conspiracy theory that remains today. Rockefeller sought from me the administration's help in declassifying the information and making the whole matter public and open.
So we knew these missiles were there. We had seen them. And when he mentioned this, and he said, I told you that I had had a meeting with an Air Force guy at Minot Air Force Base in a bar on the border. And I told you this story where they had tried to ram this one over top of a nuclear missile silo. And I said, yeah, okay, now I remember you telling me these stories. And so I started looking at why this had happened to me. And what I had determined was that when I had my sighting, my first sighting was in May of 1975, which was about 2 weeks after the end of the Vietnam War. And the idea that had popped into my head was that the Americans had lost Laos, and they had lost Cambodia, and they lost South Vietnam. And back then, I was actually, my major in the university was political studies, and I wanted to be a criminologist, to study the Soviet government and how the Kremlin worked and all the behind-the-scenes actions and stuff like that. So I was aware of the politics, and I knew that at that time, the major theory in the world was the domino theory, that the communists would just eventually, like dominoes, take one country after another, and eventually they would rule the world. Now, when the Americans had pulled out of South Vietnam, they had taken all the troops with them. And my impression was that the nuclear weapons had something to do with it, because having no boots on the ground in Southeast Asia, if they were sitting there after the Vietnam War in May of 1975 when these sightings started in Carmen, and trying to figure out what are the Russians and Chinese going to do next. Are they going to try to take Philippines or Indonesia, South Korea, and that they might have to use the nuclear weapons in order to stop them because they had no troops there. And so my impression was at that point was that the missiles in North Dakota had been on alert, that somehow the aliens had been able to read the minds of people who were in Washington who were operating these things, and that these missiles had gone on alert and the people didn't know, but the aliens had known, and that's why we had all these sightings. Because when I talked to Bob Demerton in 10 years ago, I said to him, Bob, how many sightings did you have in 1975? And he said, about 150. And I said, how many did you have after 1975? And he said, well, he started telling me about this sighting, and he mentioned a freeway. And I said, well, Bob, there's no freeways here. Where did you have the sighting? He said, in Phoenix. I said, in 1975, you had the sightings in Carmen, 150 sightings. After 1975, how many sightings did you have in Carmen? He said, none. It was as if the CIA took drugs out of the water. This went on for an entire year. And then in 1976, they went away, and they have never come back. There really has not been a sighting in this town since 1976. What I learned later was that in February of 1975, at a town called Nakoma, North Dakota, the U.S. military had put in it was the only operational anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States. This is pre-Star Wars. When Reagan comes in 1988, he starts the Star Wars, putting these weapons in outer space to try to shoot down the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles coming out of the silos. But prior to that, they had built this place at Nakoma, North Dakota. They had a place called Nixon's Pyramid, which is still there. It's a huge, giant pyramid, which was a big radar establishment where they would try to pick up the Russian missiles coming over the pole into Canada. And, of course, the missile silos were the number one target, not the American cities, because unless you take out the missile silos, you're gone. You got to take out the missile silos before you take out the city. So we were always the number one target in North Dakota. So when I saw this, that they had put these in, they had started putting the nuclear weapons in, and what they had put in was another 100 over top of the 300 they had. They had put in another 100 nuclear missiles, and some of them were 5 megaton missiles, which would try to take out the Russian intercontinental.
President Bill Clinton received at his presidential library was UFOs, close quote. In 2014, Bill Clinton told late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel that he would not be surprised if Earth has been visited by aliens, since so many planets out there may support life. In his recent December 2015 interview with Hillary, that same New Hampshire reporter Steer asked Hillary about Bill Clinton's comment to Kimmel. She said, quote, "I think we may have been visited already. We don't know for sure," close quote. Then she added that her 2016 campaign manager, John Podesta, quote, "has made me personally pledge we are going to get the information out one way or another. Maybe we could have like a task force to go to Area 51 in Nevada," close quote. Keeping track of the Lawrence Rockefeller, Clinton, and John Podesta interests in breaking open truths about UFOs is Grant Cameron from Winnipeg, Canada. He produces and reports the excellent website presidentialufo.com. And after this short break, Grant joins us to dig deeper into the political and intelligence matrix that keeps UFOs and ETs tightly bottled up. Grant, one of the areas that I hope that we could start with is, what is your perspective from all the research that you have done going back into presidential archives about what might actually have happened with UFOs at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge on that December 26th to 28th, 1980?
Well, I discovered this by accident. Basically, I was aware of the Rendlesham Forest story, but I was lecturing in Eureka Springs, Arkansas about 10 years ago, and I had gone back to where it all began for me in 1975, where for a whole year there was a series of sightings of an object known as Charlie Red Star, and I had gone back to the town to film different spots where I had some very close encounters with these things. I actually had an incident that was almost like the Bentwaters incident, and so I'm taking pictures of different things for my lecture, and I talked to a guy by the name of Bob Deemert, who was the guy who ran the airport in this small town of 2,000 people, about 25 miles north of the U.S.-Canada border, above North Dakota. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, "Bob, I'm doing this lecture, and I just wanted to know from you, what do you think actually was going on? Why do you think the UFOs were here?" And he said, "Well, you know why they were here." And I said, "No, Bob, I don't." And he said, "Yes, you do. I told you back then why they were here." And I said, "Bob, in 30 years, I have no idea why these things were here. I never thought about it. I just want to ask you." And he said, "I told you, we stood up in the hills and we watched these things. They came from the United States. It's the nuclear weapons." And as soon as he said that, all the bells and whistles and fireworks went off my head. And I instantly knew he was right, because I live just north of the Minuteman III missile silos. And these are two big establishments. One is the Minot Air Force Base. One is the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where the missiles have all been taken out now. But at 1975, when I first had my experiences, there was 300 nuclear missile silos in North Dakota. And they had said that if North Dakota had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. There was that many nuclear weapons. These big Minuteman III missiles with, the 10 warheads and all this kind of stuff. And we'd all seen them. And we knew that if there was ever a nuclear exchange, our city, Winnipeg, was the first to go, because every 10th Russian missile would land short and right on top of us.